NASCAR continues to test higher horsepower at the intermediate tracks. Here's why they should just rip the Band-Aid off and go all in 2022. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. I hope you've had a wonderful week. Today we're talking horsepower and the possibility, the very real possibility, that NASCAR could up the horsepower at the mile and a half next season. But before we get to that, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss any future episodes. This offseason has already been pretty crazy. Richard Petty Motorsports being sold, drivers switching teams, testing of the next gen continuing. There's so much going on. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of the latest NASCAR news. So yesterday, a couple of secretive NASCAR Next Gen tests were held at different venues. 3 cars tested at the Charlotte mile and a half oval. Meanwhile, Stuart Friesen was ripping the Next Gen around a dirt track. I believe this is the first time we've seen the Next Gen on a dirt track. I could be mistaken, but I think this is the first time. Looks pretty cool. Check out this clip from NASCAR. That low rumbling sound, but I'm gonna focus today primarily on that intermediate test at Charlotte. Christopher Bell was there driving the Toyota, Chase Elliott was behind the wheel of the Chevy, and Joey Logano was driving the Ford. It was a closed test, no live stream, no media there. It was really a pre-test for next week's big test with all the teams at Charlotte. This was a chance for NASCAR to try a couple of things out so they know where to begin next week, because there'll be a 2-day test and it'll be a very important 2-day test. NASCAR wants to have as much information going into it as possible. Well, the big story out of yesterday's test, though, came in a tweet from none other than Bob Pockers from Fox Sports. He tweeted this last night. NASCAR's not releasing any info on the Charlotte Oval test today. I've texted with people who were there, and from what I gather, increased horsepower, 670 horsepower among what was tried, was promising and less feeling of panic. With one caveat, it was really cold, which could impact results. So we'll look at some recent quotes from drivers here in a moment, but first things first, Bob Pocker is saying there that NASCAR is continuing to test increased horsepower at intermediates. Remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about comments Kevin Harvick made. Remember, mid-November, everyone tested at the Charlotte Oval, and the Stewart-Haas cars, including Kevin Harvick, late in the test, tested 670, as opposed to the 550 horsepower everyone else was testing and was expected to run next season. This is now the second test in a row where we have seen NASCAR try out increased horsepower at intermediate tracks. That is extremely newsworthy, and as Bob Pockers notes in his tweet right there, sounds like the increased horsepower lowered the amount of panic in the garage. Maybe the next gen car was finally starting to handle the way they liked. For what it's worth, Christian Espinosa actually lives at Charlotte Motor Speedway, so he was posting some clips from his vantage point high above the track. And at the end of the test, he tweeted, "Car looks to be a little more maneuverable / able to pass than the last test." I'm just sharing that with you guys so you have the same information I have. But going back to Bob Pockers' tweet for a moment, he mentions a certain level of panic in and around NASCAR right now about the next gen. Typical, I mean, we're less than 2 months away now from the next gen's official debut in the LA Clash, and the rules package has not been finalized. We don't know what horsepower they're gonna run at the intermediates. We don't know what the spoiler's even gonna look like. I showed you all that clip yesterday from Josh Hamilton on Twitter where you can see the right side of the spoiler's been extended, maybe to achieve extra side force. So they're continuing to experiment with things less than 2 months away from the car's official on-track racing debut. Look, NASCAR and the teams have made some impressive strides just in the last couple of months. Remember, a couple months ago, all the concern was about overheating in the cockpit. NASCAR and the teams seem to have fixed that issue. They've added slits in the front and rear windshields, which have had some perhaps adverse aero effects, but they've also in some cases shortened the exhaust tube, I guess, that goes underneath the driver, so it's not crossing completely underneath him and heating up, underneath his seat. The overheating issue seems to be mostly fixed. Same goes for the steering rack issues that we saw in the October Roval test. Almost completely derailed that test, but then the next month when they tested on the oval, nobody complained about the steering rack. It didn't seem to be an issue all week. And we've already seen some of the perks of the next gen in action. For example, during that test in mid-November, Austin Dillon crashed the car early on, completely destroyed the front of that thing, yet the crew over at Richard Childress Racing was able to bring that car back to the shop, work on it for about 5 hours or so, and completely repair it so that it could make laps again later in the day. They replaced the entire front clip, something that probably would not have been possible with the old Gen 6 cars because the way the front portion of the car was welded to the center frame. RCR's ability to assess the damage and quickly replace that portion of the car so that it could still run later in the day, like that was a pretty huge win for the next gen car. So there have been a lot of positives we've seen the last couple months. There's a lot of great progress has been made. But the reason panic is setting in is because we are less than 2 months away and there are several fairly glaring issues that remain. Namely with how the cars actually race, especially at these bigger tracks. Again, road courses, short tracks, I think the next gen more or less will be pretty darn good. But the bigger tracks, the intermediates and the super speedways, it's a complete unknown, and it sounds like many in the industry are a bit worried. For one, after that Charlotte test a couple weeks ago, pretty much everyone in the garage complained about the severe dirty air effects. More of the same from the Gen 6. Like, I understand dirty air is a thing in every major motorsport. Formula One's always talking about dirty air. But there are ways to decrease the effect of dirty air somewhat, and the new car seemingly has not accomplished those goals very well. Drivers complained about balance issues with the car. They don't exactly know how to adjust on them yet. And lastly, one of the biggest concerns in the industry is supply chain. It sounds like largely due to supply chain issues, many teams have not received all of the parts and pieces they were hoping to receive so that they could assemble their next gen cars in time for the season to begin. Remember, NASCAR's rule says that every team, and in this case I mean team like the 14 team or the 20 team, every team is allowed to have up to 7 next gen cars, in their fleet. So like Joe Gibbs Racing with 4 full-time cars could have up to 28, 7 per. But it sounds like because of these supply chain issues and the incoming deadline, many teams, if not all teams, will not have full fleets by the time Daytona rolls around. So that's its own issue entirely, but I want to focus on the drivability issue, the balance of the car, how these cars race in traffic. Because that's the thing fans are going to notice immediately if these cars race terribly in dirty air. I read a Racer.com article from a couple days ago, and in it, Martin Truex Jr. said, "The car is not where it needs to be. People are scrambling. We got to make some changes. We need to make it better so we can race with it and put on a show for the fans." Quotes like that from Martin Truex Jr. are why NASCAR postponed the Phoenix test that was scheduled for next week and instead put another 1.5 mile Charlotte test in its place. And they also added the pre-test yesterday that we've already talked about. I played this clip for y'all last week, I believe, when Kevin Harvick was on the Dale Jr. download, and in it he talked a bit about his experience driving the next gen with that 670 more horsepower. 670 horsepower, it's not a huge amount. Cup cars, these engines are capable of generating like 900 horsepower, but that 670 number is obviously more than we've seen the last couple of years on the intermediates, and it's more in line, it's very similar to what the Xfinity Series races on a weekly basis at every track, aside from super speedways. So that 670 number could be a nice compromise. Anyway, I'm gonna play this clip again. This was Kevin Harvick on the Dale Jr. download talking about the effects of more horsepower in the next gen.
We put more power on there. I'm like, man, this thing actually drives better. I still have to lift a little bit in 3 and 4. They're like, well, the faster you go, the more that that underpan is going to make more power because you're going faster, so it makes more speed. It's going to make more grip. So it's an interesting balance because what are we, 8 weeks out from the first race? So you got a lot of decisions that have to be made quick.
So again, that clip was from last week before yesterday's 3-car pre-test, where teams reportedly tested 670 horsepower among other numbers. They might have even tested more than 670. Bob Pockrass in that initial tweet said among what was tried. So they might have tried 750, might have tried 600, 650. I have no idea, but 670 seems to be the number everyone's zeroing in on right now, since they seemingly have not achieved the results they were hoping to achieve with 550. So I know this whole episode has largely been focused on background information, recapping how we got to this point right here, right now on December 10th, 2021, but I finally made it to my point, and this is what I think NASCAR should do immediately. NASCAR today, or Monday if you want to wait for the beginning of a work week, as soon as possible, NASCAR should put a press release out saying we're increasing the horsepower at the intermediate tracks next year. We're going to 670. They should just rip that Band-Aid off, admit that, hey, 550 is not giving us what we wanted. We're going with 650 at all tracks next year. Deal with it. Because if they put that press release out on Monday, fans will deal with it, I think, in a largely positive manner. There'll be people that clown NASCAR, of course. They'll say, yeah, of course, we knew all along. We were right, you were wrong, haha. Some people will rub it in your face, but overall, it will be tremendous publicity. good publicity if NASCAR bucks the trend and actually announces they are adding a significant amount of horsepower back into the Cup Series cars next year at intermediates. Drivers will be more willing to talk about it in a positive way. I mean, last night Clint Boyer tweeted this kind of out of nowhere, and he works for one of the networks. Reacting to a clip from 2011 or 2012 there, he says, "The only thing I noticed from this clip is the sound of that fire-breathing dragon. The good old days when them babies actually made some horsepower." So Boyer, they're taking a not so subtle shot at the 550 horsepower, and he's the guy who's got to make it look good on TV every week next year, and he's out here trashing 550, so the drivers will be more willing to promote it if you boost the horsepower to 670. You already heard Kevin Harvick would be in favor of that. And as I've said many times on this show in the past, fans are always going to care more about what the drivers are saying. Even drivers they don't necessarily like, they're always going to care more about what a driver says compared to what NASCAR executives may say. If Steve Phelps, the president of NASCAR, says something about an issue and Tyler Reddick says something a little different about the same issue, fans are going to typically side with Tyler Reddick. They're almost always going to side with the driver. Another reason NASCAR should just go all in with 670 is, it would be easy on the engine shop. You'd only have to tune the engines to one specific horsepower number every week, no matter the type of track, outside the super speedway races, I guess. And all along, NASCAR's pitched the 550 horsepower package as, oh, that's what new manufacturers want to see. Like, we're not going to get any new manufacturers, new investments, new teams. If we have huge, big horsepower engines, they want 550, so that's why we're doing it. I thought they were committed to that number. I know within the next couple of years, we're going to see a different engine package. Even before that, we might see some sort of electrical components enter into the fray, but I thought all this time NASCAR was pretty much dead set on 550, especially at the big tracks, and nothing was going to deter them. But it seemingly has not taken much for them to at least experiment with higher horsepower in the intermediate. So clearly that 550 number is not a fixed number. They are at least somewhat willing to experiment with something in the mid 600s, high 600s. So knowing that they're willing to test 650 in a Cup car, just do it. Just do it next year, every race. It sounds like the cars handle better with it anyway, so why not do it? And my last point, my last reason why NASCAR should make this announcement Monday morning, more horsepower to intermediate tracks, is because right now, with the way the cars handle, with the way they drive, with the horsepower, with the 550 horsepower under the engine, they are not going to achieve pack racing at mile and a half next year. Outside of maybe Atlanta, because it's going to have increased banking, maybe Atlanta they'll get some pack racing, but everywhere else, Charlotte, Texas, Las Vegas, Homestead, they will not achieve pack racing. Like Denny Hamlin said weeks ago, if NASCAR truly wants pack racing at the mile and a half, they're going to need to drop that horsepower number even lower, down probably around 400 or even lower. And they don't show any signs of doing that. So right now, with the cars you have right now, 550 horsepower and everything, you're not getting pack racing next year. So if you're not getting pack racing, why not boost the horsepower a bit and, get a little off throttle time again, just for funsies? Like, if the field is not going to be bunched up in a pack for the majority of a run, I don't see what other appeal the 550 horsepower package has. So I've laid out my reasons. Monday morning, NASCAR should put out a press release to the world saying, we're bumping the horsepower at the intermediate track, 670 at Texas, at Charlotte, at Las Vegas, across the board, 670 everywhere except I guess on the super speedways. They should put that press release out immediately. I just realized I've been saying Monday morning this whole time. They probably should do their due diligence and wait until they do that test next week. Okay, so maybe the week after next. I'm jumping the gun a little bit. It feels like they should just put it out now, honestly, but okay, fine. Wait until after next week's test, run a few more diagnostics, make sure you got all your ducks in a row, but as soon as possible, put that press release out. The fans want to hear it. The drivers are more willing to hear it. And it sounds like at this point, it's going to lead to better racing at the intermediates next year. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we get higher horsepower racing next year. I think at this point, that's what will put on the best show. That's what will keep the most fans happy, the most drivers happy, and that's obviously what's most important. So obviously those are my thoughts as someone who has not seen any of the wind tunnel data, who has not seen any of the hard data from any of these tests, as someone who does not work for any of the teams, who is not an engineer, who is not a race car driver. I'm really destroying my credibility here, but y'all know who I am. I'm a guy I used to be in my college dorm, now I'm in my apartment talking NASCAR with you guys. From my vantage point, NASCAR should add horsepower at all the tracks, or at least at the intermediates. It feels like a no-brainer at this point. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I have a feeling I know what most of the comments are going to say, but share your thoughts down below as well. I appreciate the conversation as always. So appreciate y'all watching. That's going to do it. Again, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR nearly every day here, even during the off season. The news just does not slow down. And as always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. I truly appreciate your very generous support. Not sure if I'll have a video up this weekend, but if any big news breaks, I will be right here to talk about it. Thanks for watching, folks. I will see you again very, very soon.